Today on Face the Nation, should Tonya Harding skate for the U.S. Olympic team?
The United States Figure Skating Association Hearing Panel unanimously determines that reasonable grounds exist to pursue disciplinary proceedings against Tonya Harding.
Yesterday, the U.S. Figure Skating Association ordered a disciplinary hearing for Harding to determine her involvement in the attack on rival skater Nancy Kerrigan. Was the Figure Skating Association just passing the buck? Could their action yesterday cause Olympic officials to remove Harding from the U.S. team? And what about Nancy Kerrigan and the effect of all this on her? We'll ask the head of the investigating panel, William Hybl, and the president of the association, Claire Ferguson. Then we'll have a debate about whether Harding should skate between sports writer Frank DeFord of Vanity Fair and Ira Burko of the New York Times.
Face the Nation with Chief Washington correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
And welcome again to Face the Nation. Joining us this morning from Colorado Springs will be William Hybl, who is the chairman of the hearing panel, and from Boca Grande, Florida, Claire Ferguson, who is the president of the U.S. Figure Skating Association. But before we talk to them, we're going to go out to Portland, Oregon, and talk to the managing editor of the Oregonian, Peter Bhatia, whose newspaper has been covering this from start to finish. Mr. Bhatia, I must say, we've asked you here this morning because your newspaper would report one day what was going to happen, and it was the best kind of a scoop that any newspaper can have, because then the next day, officials would confirm that your story was correct. So I guess the question we want to ask you this morning, what do you hear? What is the status of the investigation that the police are doing out there?
Well, I'll tell you, Bob, it's really a back-and-forth, sort of up-and-down situation. I think the authorities here still believe they can make a case against Tonya Harding, but they're being extremely deliberate about it, and they're still saying it could be many, many days before they actually make a decision, to charge or not to charge. And I still think it's a real possibility they may ultimately not charge her with anything.
But you don't expect that to be resolved, say, in the next couple of days or in the next week?
It doesn't feel like it, although it changes day by day, almost hour by hour. It's quite possible something could happen this week, but probably not likely.
What about the hometown fans in Portland? We see on television at night there is considerable support out there, but what's the overriding feeling? Do people out there want to skate, or do they not?
I think the community here is really divided. There are a lot of people here who have supported Tonya Harding and watched her grow and become a world-class figure skater and want to believe in her and do believe in her and believe that what she says, that she wasn't involved. I think there's another significant part of the population, and it really is kind of a 50-50 deal, I think, who are tired of this and are tired of her antics, both, off the ice as well over the years, and think this is embarrassing to Portland and to Oregon, and don't think she's somebody who should be representing this country in the Olympics.
All right, there's another point. This piece of handwriting, this piece of trash, or this letter that somebody found in the trash that had some writing on it. Did your newspaper, as I understand it, hire a handwriting expert to analyze that? Have you come to any determination about whether that was indeed Tonya Harding's handwriting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of the nature of the story that a key piece of evidence would show up in a dumpster. Somehow that all fits. The handwriting analyst who looked at it for us said it did appear to be Tonya Harding's writing on the envelope. That was information about the rink in Boston where Nancy Kerrigan practices.
And of course the significance of that would be that if indeed it was her handwriting, it would suggest she may have known about this as the attack was being planned. All right, well, Peter, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Maybe we'll talk to you in the coming weeks. All right, let's go now to the members of the Olympic U.S. Figure Skating Association. Yesterday, William Hybl headed the panel that recommended a disciplinary hearing for Tonya Harding. Let me ask you, Mr. Hybl, first, what was it that most impressed you, and what was the overriding factor in your investigation to cause you to say that, yes, we should have a disciplinary hearing?
I don't think it was one thing. The entire panel, Bob, considered a variety of evidence. This included evidence that's in the public domain, principally the reports that were released by the FBI. There was our investigator, our special counsel in Portland, who really had an independent investigation and provided to the panel a variety of, I think, probably enlightening type evidence. And then, of course, the United States Figure Skating Association continued to supply their evidence from records they had.
Well, now, you heard Mr. Bhatia just now saying that the investigation is still going on. There's speculation out there in Portland about when, indeed, this investigation might conclude. If that investigation should result in Tonya Harding being charged with something, would your association then come back and forward new information to the U.S. Olympic Committee? How would you handle that?
Well, there's a different standard. That's a criminal proceeding where they're using a different standard of evidence, different type of evidence. The United States Figure Skating Association is having an administrative hearing. It's a double process. It's a process where first there's an investigative stage, which we've been through and found reasonable cause. Now we go to the disciplinary hearing stage.
But until you come to the disciplinary hearing, would you more or less consider your work being finished at this? You've done what you need to do, or could there be anything beyond that until the hearing comes along?
The panel has charged our special attorney up in Portland to really continue with the process of investigation, and that'll be ongoing until the hearing March 9th or 10th.
All right. Well, now, let me ask Mrs. Ferguson, because you're the president of the association, and I guess one question that occurs to me is, as the president of the association, you had the right to suspend Tonya Harding from the association, and if she is not a member of a governing body of the sport in her home country, then, of course, that would make her ineligible for the Olympics. You told me yesterday, I believe, that you would not do that. You would not take any action to suspend her until after the hearing. I want to ask you why. For example, if you should suspend her now, that would certainly force her, if she wants to compete in the Olympics, to go before that hearing panel before the 30 days is up and resolve this before the Olympics are held. So why did you not decide to suspend her?
The preliminary hearing is based on our code of ethics. We have a number of rules and regulations in our association, and as in most corporations and businesses, a code of ethics is very important for good sportsmanship and fair play. That's what this hearing is all about. I would prefer to have Tonya, her time with the hearing panel, to follow through and to make sure she's had her chance to speak with the member panel.
But you would not, under any conditions, I take it, suspend her in an effort to force that hearing before the Olympics and to resolve the situation before the Olympics.
No, because I believe that the Olympics has a different set of rules that can handle this if they so choose. We are concerned with our World Championships as well as the Olympics, which will be held in Japan in the middle of March, and we must have our team there. Our placements for the next year are based on this World Championships. It's very important.
Well, let me ask both of you this question. Do you really think that Tonya Harding represents the ideal of the Olympic athlete? Mrs. Ferguson?
Well, I think that's a question that would have to be left up to the public. An ideal athlete in one person's eye might be different in another.
Mr. Hybl?
Well, she's qualified to participate in the Olympic Games, and this panel looked at that very carefully. The fact is, we want to make sure in any deliberation that we have that we follow a fair process. But the fair process is going to be one that'll lead to, hopefully, a just conclusion.
Well, you were president of the Olympic Committee at one time. If you were the president now, would you do what the committee is now considering? Would you call a hearing to try to sort this out before the Olympics?
Well, I think that's a question better directed to Leroy Walker, the president of the Olympic Committee, because that's a very good group they have in Lillehammer. The Games Administrative Board is really comprised of the very best people in the United States Olympic movement. These men and women, I think, certainly are in a position to make a reasoned and balanced judgment.
Okay, let me ask you another question, because there clearly are going to be people, there are already people who are saying that what you did yesterday was really just a delaying action. You're just kind of passing the buck on to the Olympic Committee. I want to ask you, is this really about litigation? Are you really fearful that if you should suspend her now, if you should have taken stronger action, that you'd be subject to a lawsuit? I mean, that's happened to the Olympic committees before. How much of a factor is that, Mr. Hybl?
Well, I think there's no question it's been widely discussed, but this is one issue the panel discussed, and the 5 of us decided that we were going to go forward based on the evidence, based on the rules and the articles and the bylaws of the Figure Skating Association, and not really let the fact that there could be litigation be involved in our decision.
Mrs. Ferguson, how do you think that Tonya Harding, let's say she does skate, how do you think she's going to be received in Norway?
Oh, that is a difficult question, too. I think that the audience will, there will be a number of Canadians and Americans there, and I would have no idea how they may respond to her skating.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us this morning. Probably we'll be talking to you later along the way. When we come back, we'll have our debate. Should Tonya Harding skate or shouldn't she?
This portion of Face the Nation is sponsored by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. ADM, supermarket to the world.
These days, information is often out of date in the time it takes to publish it.
Hold it.
So, why print it before you need it?
Hold it.
With the Xerox DocuTech, you scan, store, and customize your documents electronically, so you can get them instantly, when, where, and how you want them.
Hold it.
Scanning, printing, publishing. Xerox, the document company.
How much you spend on breakfast every morning?
I don't know, a couple dollars. I think it's a little nosy.
When could you have fed your family for less than $1?
Well, let's say maybe 1940.
Okay, here's the kicker. Kellogg's cornflakes and milk is less than 25 cents a serving.
For this whole bowl with the milk and the cereal, 25 cents?
Less than 25 cents a serving.
I'm surprised. 25 cents, that goes back 50 years.
Kellogg's cornflakes. Another reason to taste them again for the first time.
4 bowls for $8.
And joining us now from our studios in New York, Frank DeFord, who writes now for Vanity Fair, one-time writer for Sports Illustrated, editor-in-chief of the now-defunct national sports newspaper called The National, and Ira Burko of the New York Times, 2 men that I've read, gentlemen, your work, both of you, for many years, so it's a pleasure to have you this morning. Ira, you have written a number of columns about this, and the bottom line to your columns has been Let Her Skate. Frank DeFord, you take an opposite point of view. I must tell you, I come down where I believe Ira, and I side with Ira about 5 minutes, and then I side with Frank DeFord about 5 minutes. I suspect there are many people around the country who feel just like I did. You just can't make up our mind what we think ought to be done here. Ira, let's just start it off. Give me your best shot. Why should she be allowed to skate?
I think she should be allowed to skate because there should be a presumption of innocence in regard to her case and to every other American's case who's been accused of something, a crime or something close to that. And she has said that, or maintained that she had no prior knowledge of the assault on Nancy Kerrigan. If she had no prior knowledge on the assault of Nancy Kerrigan, she had no impact on the event itself, meaning the World Championships. And even if she concealed something afterward, it had nothing to do with the event itself. And so that right now there is no evidence, there is no conclusive evidence that she had anything to do with the impact on the event. And so I feel that she should be allowed to skate in this sporting event in Norway.
Okay, you've convinced me for 5 minutes. Okay, Frank, tell me what's wrong with that argument.
Well, if you start with the premise that she should be allowed to skate unless she is convicted of a crime, there's really no argument here because obviously we cannot have a court trial before the Olympics are held, so it becomes almost moot. But I start from another premise, and that is that the attack on Nancy Kerrigan was as heinous as anything that has ever been done in competitive sport. And once I found that that Tonya Harding's husband, her ex-husband, the man she was living with, and his colleagues had done this, I thought that she should pull out right then. That in the name of fair play, she should have said, I am appalled at what has been done in my name has risen against her. I think this has been all the more compelling. But obviously, Tonya Harding is not of a nature to pull out, and at that point, I think, particularly with the preponderance of evidence against her, and with the fact that she has admitted to one crime, hindering the investigation. I think it's clear that it's time for the United States Olympic Committee to make her stay away. I mean, someone must speak up for fair play, and someone must speak up for sport. And if it's not the Olympic Committee that does this, then no one will. Okay,
you've convinced me now of your argument. I'm back in the middle here. Ira, let me ask you this question in a serious way. Let us suppose that when this attack took place on Tonya Harding, that she had been hurt. Let's suppose that it had broken her leg. She would not only not be able to skate now, but she might have to walk with a limp for the rest of her life. Would that change it in any way? Should Tonya Harding still be allowed to skate?
Bob, I sympathize greatly with Nancy Kerrigan, but the overriding principle is the overriding question leading to the principle is, did Tonya Harding have anything to do with the assault itself? If she did, she should not be allowed to skate. She changed the playing field. If she didn't, she should be allowed to skate. Just because the people around her were involved in it doesn't mean that she was involved with it. She's a tough cookie. She spent, from the time she was 3 years old, skating, striving for this kind of recognition and hoping to win a gold medal in the Olympics. And she cannot be held responsible for the people around her, just as many times most of us can't be held responsible for the people around us.
Frank?
Well, what's the question, Bob?
Do you agree with that? That is an argument that she shouldn't be allowed to, she shouldn't have to be responsible for the folks around her.
Well, no, the question, that's not the real question before us. The question is, did she live up to the ethics of the Olympic Committee and the Olympic Code? You know, from the very beginning in which you enter any sport, every little girl and boy is told, these are the rules. If you don't obey the rules, you can't play the game. There's no question that she has broken the ethics of the Olympic Code that is spelled out very neatly by the Figure Skating Association. And so the question of the ancillary question of whether or not the sharing the responsibility is not at issue right now. As the evidence comes up, and I think it will be viewed by the U.S. Olympic Committee, it's possible then, and I suppose, Ira, I'd have to ask Ira, do you require her to be judged in a court of law, or do you allow the decision of the U.S. Olympic Committee to be accepted?
I would go for a court of law in this, because the Olympic Committee, many times, we don't know who's on the Olympic Committee, and what's an interesting thing, what's troubling right now for me, Frank, is that the FBI, with all their investigations, have not leveled any charges against Tonya Harding. So if they haven't yet, and if the Olympic Committee does before the FBI charges, then I'm questioning this, because the Olympic Committee is using evidence from the FBI, and I don't also think that athletics should be held on a higher plane than the rest of society.
I don't think it's a higher plane. I think it's a different plane. The Fifth and Sixth Amendments, which provide the due process in the Constitution, state specifically that they relate to criminal charges. No one from the author of the Bill of Rights on down has ever suggested for a moment that those amendments abridge the rights of free association, the opportunity for clubs, for schools, for teams to make rules governing its own members. I mean, this weekend, for example, several athletes, a couple at the University of Michigan particularly, were fired from their teams for actions that did not require felonies to have them thrown off the teams. Pete Rose was suspended from the Hall of Fame, perhaps in perpetuity, because he had allegedly, and he continues to deny it, broken the rules of baseball. So what Ira is saying is that sports have no opportunity to govern themselves. And the only way that you can ever be suspended from sports is if you are convicted of a felony in a court of law. I simply don't agree with
Frank, the federal government has taken a step in amateur sports. There was an Amateur Sports Act of 1978 saying that athletes have rights. Before this, the USOC and other amateur groups arbitrarily threw people off the teams. And so now the federal government stepped in, and there is a federally protected right for athletes in this country to have due process.
All right, let me, I'm sorry, go ahead, Frank.
No, I was just going to say that amateur law of 1978 provides athletic associations the right to discipline its members, so long, of course, as they have due process. And I think that what we saw today with Mrs. Ferguson and Mr. Hybl, that's certainly not a Star Chamber hearing. I don't think anybody would suggest that a kangaroo court is going on.
Well, we don't know. I mean, what they did right now is act pretty much like a grand jury and saying there is reasonable cause here. That doesn't mean a conviction. It's not even well, it's not a conviction. And so there is reasonable cause to go ahead with the proceedings. That's all.
All right, let me just interject one thing here, because I'd like to hear what both of you feel about this. This whole business, this threat of lawsuits, do you think that what is causing people to walk so delicately around this is that both the Olympic Committee and the U.S. Figure Skating Association are simply afraid of being sued here? What kind of an impact is the threat of a lawsuit having on all of this, Ira?
Well, I think that they should have concern for a lawsuit. In December of 1992, Butch Reynolds won a judgment in federal court for $27 million because it was decided that he was wrongfully kept from off the Olympic team. So the Olympic team now doesn't want to be sued for anything, including or have a judgment passed against them for $27 million more or less. So they are proceeding very cautiously.
Mm-hmm. Frank?
I think that's very good that they're proceeding cautiously. I think that it gives Tonya Harding even more rights than she might ever have expected to have. But to suggest that the sins of the fathers, to suggest that because Jim Thorpe lost his medals in 1912, guarantees Tonya Harding a clear path to the Olympics in 1994 is nonsense. And by the way, the Butch Reynolds case is brought up often, and I quite agree with Ira in that matter. But the fact of the situation is that that was not a United States organization that prevented Reynolds. It was a very notorious International Track and Field Association run by one man, Primo Nubiola, who has very little concern, an Italian who has very little concern for American fair play.
But Frank, I think it established the American court's view of fairness to athletes.
How is Tonya Harding going to be received? Let's assume that she is going to skate. How is she going to be received when she comes onto the ice? And will this have an impact on the judges? Because as we have seen in Olympics past, these judges, these are very subjective judgments that they make. How will she be received, Frank?
Well, I suspect that we'd all be in agreement here that it's going to be very difficult for her, that there is an awful lot of subjective judgment, and I do not think that they're going to entertain her very kindly. By the same token, I'm less concerned about how the judges will receive her, but about how the impact will be on Nancy Kerrigan. In effect, she's going to have to suffer a sort of a form of double jeopardy. Once she's whacked on the knees, and now she's going to have to go through a psychological trauma. I think that if there's any benefit of the doubt, it should accrue to Nancy Kerrigan and not Tonya Harding, assuming, and I think we can see it, that Tonya Harding gets a fair hearing as she has been promised.
About 20 seconds for the final word there, Ira.
Well, I think that the Olympic judges will bend over backwards to be fair. And I disagree with Frank on the point of who should get the benefit of doubt from the judges. I mean, both of them are in athletic competition and should be judged equally.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a very enlightening discussion. I will just close by our colleague Joe Klein of Newsweek magazine may have brought an entirely new angle to all of this. He writes in the coming issue, he calls all of this one of the lovely loony moments in American history, and he comes upon something new. He says he notes that Tonya Harding married Jeff Gillooly, she said, because he had a state job, and in that way she could be covered by his health plan. He says that if we had universal health coverage in this country, none of this would have happened. I can see him at the White House now writing this down. We'll be back with a final word in just a moment.
There's a race going on in this country, and the stakes are high. It's a race to save one of America's most precious resources, our topsoil, from a disaster that could ultimately threaten the survival of our civilization. In just 100 years of deep plowing, half the topsoil in much of our most productive farmland has been blown or washed away, severely threatening our ability to grow the food we need. Today's farmers are gearing up for the race by turning from deep plowing to an innovative practice that reduces soil erosion as much as 92%. It's called no-till, and compared to conventional plowing, it saves labor, time, and fuel while preserving water quality and helping protect the environment. By adopting such practices now, we can save our topsoil for countless generations to come. And thanks to the American farmer, we're gaining ground every day.
All that.
These days, information is often out of date in the time it takes to publish it.
All that.
So, why print it before you need it?
All that.
With the Xerox DocuTech, you scan, store, and customize your documents electronically, so you can get them instantly, when, where, and how you want them.
All that.
Scanning, printing, publishing. Xerox, the document company.
What do you reckon this bowl of cereal costs?
About 50 cents.
75 cents.
Take a bite of that and tell me what you think.
80 cents.
About $1.25.
That serving of cereal with the milk is less than a quarter.
Got a whole bowl? That's pretty good.
Less than 25 cents.
It's Kellogg's Corn Flakes.
Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Original and best.
I remember the chicken on the cover.
The rooster.
Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Another reason to taste them again for the first time.
You can't even buy a postage stamp for 25 cents anymore.
We'll celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Beatles' first trip to America.
Plus Valentine's Day chocolates you won't forget.
Tomorrow on CBS This Morning with Harry Smith and Paula Zahn.
Finally today, Face the Nation is going to be preempted for the next 3 weeks because of these very Olympics that we've been talking about this morning. The Olympics coverage will be on where Face the Nation usually is. So we hope you'll be watching the Olympics. We'll be in hibernation. John Roberts will have the rest of today's news on the CBS Evening News. And then when it gets warmer, we'll be right back here on Face the Nation. See you then.
Not only is it America's most abundant crop, it's also the most versatile. At the Archer Daniels Midland Company, we get golden corn oil from it, as well as corn sweeteners, ethanol, and protein products used in animal feeds. Today, we're extracting even more sophisticated value-added products from corn. Products such as citric acid, which gives candies and fruit-flavored beverages their tangy flavor. And lysine, an amino acid that optimizes the nutrition of poultry and swine feeds. But even this list is far from complete. Right now, we're developing additional value-added products from corn, along with innovative applications for them. Because at ADM, we believe the potential of this crop is nearly as great as its supply. ADM, supermarket to the world.
This portion of Face the Nation was sponsored by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. ADM, supermarket to the world.
Experience CBS News. Kids, the statistics are chilling, the crisis growing. What can be done? See an Eye on America special series starting tomorrow on the CBS Evening News. This is CBS.
It's a dark, tight feeling when you don't get a peek. Yeah, it's a mattress I need and a good night's sleep.
Now, during the home sale at the Bon Marché, save 20 to 50% on premium mattress sets like Beauty Sleep, Beauty Rest, Posturepedic, and Perfect Sleeper. Plus, take a bonus of $25 off any twin and full set, and $50 off any queen and king set. And through Monday only, we'll double that bonus. For 2 days only at the Bon Marché.
Commitment, dedication, devotion, perfection. There are no fanfares here, no cheering crowds, just a lot of hard work, determination, and the will to be the very best. Because deep down, the only person you're really doing this for is yourself.
For sound, honest advice on protecting the important things in your life, see one of these State Farm agents today.
Go on patrol in Toppenish tomorrow on Newsbeat at 6.